Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. When you've got nothing but a cold shed and some oats, saving a life seems foolish, but for Eli Boone, it was all that mattered. One frozen December morning in Montana, this widowed ranch hand found a half-dead donkey tangled in barbed wire. He could have walked away. He didn't. What Eli didn't know was that this stubborn creature would lead him straight to a fortune buried in the mountains, a lost silver claim worth millions. But when sudden wealth crashes into a simple life, the real question isn't how to spend it. It's whether money can replace what you've already lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind in Pine Ridge. Montana carried the kind of cold that worked its way through wool and bone alike. Eli Boone had learned to live with it over 61 winters, the same way he'd learned to live with silence, with solitude, and with the particular emptiness that comes from being a man whose best days live only in memory. Now, his cabin sat at the end of a rutted dirt road that disappeared under snow from November through March. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace that ate wood faster than he could chop it, and windows that rattled when the north wind picked up. But it was paid for, which was more than most folks could say. The shed out back leaned slightly to the east, propped up with timber he'd salvaged from the old Jacobson place after it burned down 5 years ago. Nothing in Eli's life was new. Everything had history, had stories, had come from somewhere else first. He woke that December morning the way he woke every morning, in the grey light before dawn, his hand reaching automatically across the bed to the empty space where Sarah used to sleep. 3 years she'd been gone, and his hand still looked for her. Some habits ran deeper than reason. The cabin was cold enough to see his breath. He dressed without ceremony, long underwear, flannel shirt, denim work pants worn soft at the knees, wool socks with a hole in the left heel he kept meaning to darn. His boots sat by the door, stiff with cold. He pulled them on and laced them with the efficiency of a man who'd done this same task 10,000 times. The kitchen was just a corner of the main room, a propane stove, a sink with a pump handle, a table built from pine planks. He made coffee in the blue enamel pot, the one Sarah had used every morning of their marriage. The first cup was always the best, hot and strong and bitter. He drank it standing at the window, watching the sky lighten over the ridge. December in Montana meant the sun rose late and set early, as if it too found the cold unbearable, and wanted to spend as little time as possible above the horizon. The thermometer outside read 14 degrees. Not the worst he'd seen, but cold enough to be careful. Cold enough to kill if you weren't paying attention. Tom Henderson would be expecting him by 7. The Henderson Ranch sprawled across 500 acres of bottomland along Willow Creek, running cattle and horses and keeping Eli employed 4 days a week fixing fence, mucking stalls, and doing the 100 other jobs that ranches required. The work paid $200 a week in cash, enough for food, enough for propane, enough to keep the truck running. It wasn't prosperity, but it was survival. And Eli had made his peace with the difference. He finished his coffee, rinsed the pot, and pulled on his canvas coat, the one with Sarah's initials stitched inside the collar, in her careful hand. She'd done that the winter before she got sick, saying she wanted part of herself to keep him warm. It had seemed sentimental at the time, maybe even foolish. Now he understood it for what it was, her way of staying close after she was gone. The truck started on the 3rd try, coughing blue smoke into the frozen air. Eli let it idle while he scraped frost from the windshield. The radio played country music from a station in Kalispell, old songs, the kind that remembered when country music was about real life instead of trucks and parties. He recognized the voice of Merle Haggard and let the song play, remembering how Sarah used to hum along to this same music while she cooked dinner. The drive to Henderson's took 20 minutes along back roads where he never saw another vehicle. Pine Ridge wasn't the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. You came to Pine Ridge because you were born there, or because you were running from something, or because you wanted to disappear. Eli had been born in Billings, but he'd come here with Sarah 40 years ago because she'd grown up in these mountains and wanted to come home. After she died, he stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning the only place where he could still feel her presence. The town itself consisted of one paved street with a general store, a post office, a diner that opened at 6 and closed at 2, Doc Pritchard's veterinary clinic, and the Dusty Boot Saloon, where old men played cards and told the same stories they'd been telling for 30 years. Population, 412, according to the sign at the town limits, though Eli suspected it was fewer now. Young people left. That was the way of small towns in big, empty country. They left for colleges and cities, and lives that held more promise than fixing fence in sub-zero weather. Tom Henderson met him in the ranch yard. A tall man in his late 50s with a grey moustache and the permanent squint of someone who'd spent his entire life looking into bright sun and blowing snow. "Morning, Eli." "Tom, got a section of fence down along the north pasture." "Elk, probably. Need you to run up there and see what we're dealing with." Eli nodded. Fence work meant a full day in the cold, but that was fine. He preferred work that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. The truck had fence supplies always loaded in the bed: wire, posts, stretchers, staples. He'd learned long ago to be prepared for anything. The north pasture bordered BLM land, open range, where elk migrated down from the high country when the snow got deep. They were magnificent animals, but they had no respect for barbed wire. Eli found the damage easily enough: 30 feet of fence down, posts snapped, wire tangled in the snow. It would take most of the day to fix properly. He worked steadily, methodically, the way he did everything. Dig out the old posts, set new ones, string the wire tight. His hands were calloused enough that he barely felt the cold anymore. This was honest work, the kind that left a man tired but satisfied. Sarah used to say that idle hands led to idle thoughts, and idle thoughts led to sorrow. She'd been right about that, like she'd been right about most things. It was nearly noon when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the winter quiet. Something between a bray and a groan, distant and desperate. Eli straightened, listening. There it was again, coming from farther north, deeper into the timber. He could have ignored it. Should have, probably. Whatever was making that sound wasn't his concern. But something in the tone, in the raw desperation of it, pulled at him. He recognized suffering when he heard it. Eli left his tools and walked toward the sound, breaking trail through snow that came up past his knees in places. The trees here were thick: lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, their branches heavy with snow. The sound came again, closer now, and he pushed toward it. That's when he found the donkey. It was tangled in a mess of barbed wire that must have been part of some ancient fence line, so old the posts had rotted away and fallen. The animal had struggled. That much was clear from the trampled snow and the way the wire had wrapped tighter around its legs and neck. Blood marked the snow in dark spots. The donkey's eyes rolled white with fear and exhaustion. "Easy now," Eli said quietly, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Easy." The donkey tried to thrash away from him, but it had no strength left. It was a small animal, maybe 4 feet at the shoulder, with a rough grey coat matted with ice and blood. How long it had been trapped out here, Eli couldn't say. Hours, certainly. Maybe since last night. He knelt in the snow, talking in a low, steady voice, while he examined the wire. It was wrapped in a vicious tangle, the kind that got worse the more you fought it. The donkey's left foreleg was cut deep, and there were lacerations across its chest and neck. The animal was shaking, whether from cold or shock or both. "All right, friend. I'm going to help you, but you've got to trust me. Can you do that?" The donkey's ear twitched forward, listening. Eli worked his wire cutters from his coat pocket. He carried them always, along with fence pliers and a knife. He started cutting carefully, talking the whole time, his voice low and calm. The donkey flinched with each snip but didn't fight him. Some animals understood when you were trying to help. This one seemed to. It took 20 minutes to free the animal completely. When the last strand of wire fell away, the donkey didn't immediately try to stand. It just lay in the snow, trembling, looking up at Eli with dark eyes that held more intelligence than he expected. "Come on now." "Can't stay out here." Eli slipped off his coat and draped it over the donkey's back, then worked his arms under the animal and lifted. The donkey wasn't heavy, maybe 300 pounds, but it was awkward, and Eli's back protested. He was 61 years old, not 30. But he'd made a decision the moment he heard that sound, and Eli Boone didn't walk away from decisions once they were made. He carried the donkey back to his truck, going slow, resting twice. By the time he got there, his arms were shaking and his breath came hard. He laid the animal in the truck bed on a bed of burlap sacks and drove straight back to his cabin, leaving the fence work unfinished. Tom would understand. Anyone who'd spent time with animals would understand. The shed was warmer than outside, but not by much. Eli spread fresh straw on the floor and bedded the donkey down, then went to work cleaning the wounds. He had a first aid kit meant for livestock, peroxide, antibiotic ointment, bandages. The donkey stood quiet while he worked, as if it understood this was help, not harm. When the wounds were clean and dressed, Eli brought oats and fresh water. The donkey ate slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. That was a good sign. An animal that ate was an animal that wanted to live. "Reckon you need a name," Eli said, sitting on an overturned bucket, watching the donkey eat. "How about Lucky? Because finding you out there, that was lucky for both of us, I think." The donkey looked at him and brayed softly, a sound more companionable than desperate now. Eli sat there a long time, watching Lucky eat, feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years, a sense of purpose, of being needed. He thought about the small tobacco tin he kept in his nightstand drawer, the one that held Sarah's wedding ring. He'd taken it off her finger the day they buried her, unable to leave it in the ground, unable to wear it himself. It sat in that tin, a simple gold band worn thin from 40 years of her wearing it. And sometimes, late at night, he'd take it out and hold it, remembering what it meant to be needed, to be loved, to matter to someone. "She'd have liked you," he told the donkey. "Sarah, I mean." She had a soft spot for strays and lost things. Said everyone deserves a second chance. Lucky raised his head from the oats and looked at Eli with those intelligent, dark eyes. And for just a moment, Eli could have sworn the animal understood every word. 3 weeks passed, and Lucky recovered, with the resilience animals often showed when given half a chance. The wounds healed clean, the trembling stopped, and the donkey filled out on regular meals of oats and hay. Eli found himself looking forward to the twice-daily routine of feeding and checking on his unexpected guest. The shed that had been just a storage space became something else, a place where living things mattered, where care was given and received. It was a Saturday morning, clear and cold, when Eli decided to give Lucky a proper grooming. The donkey's coat had been matted and filthy when Eli found him, and though it had improved with basic care, it needed more attention. Eli brought out his horse brushes, relics from years ago when he and Sarah had kept a mare, and set to work. Lucky stood patient in the winter sunlight while Eli worked the curry comb through the thick winter coat. Dead hair came away in clouds, revealing the healthier fur beneath. The donkey's coloring was distinctive, mostly grey with a dark cross pattern across the shoulders, the mark that gave donkeys their reputation in old stories as blessed animals. Sarah would have made some comment about that, about how they'd carried Mary to Bethlehem, about how good luck followed them. She'd been the one who believed in such things. While Eli dealt in fence posts and hay bales, he was working through a particularly tangled section of Maine when his fingers touched something that wasn't hair. Something hard, metallic, caught deep in the matted strands near Lucky's pole. Eli worked it free carefully, a brass compass, tarnished but intact, about the size of a pocket watch. The weight of it felt substantial in his palm. Eli turned it over, examining it in the sunlight. The brass case was dented and scratched, but the glass crystal remained unbroken. On the back, engraved in script that time hadn't erased, were the initials JM, and below them a set of coordinates: 47°3 Den, 114°51'. Eli opened the compass. The needle still worked, swinging to magnetic north with authority. This was a quality instrument, not some cheap novelty. Someone had valued this compass, had carried it with purpose. How it ended up tangled in Lucky's mane was a mystery that sent Eli's mind working in directions he hadn't expected. "Where'd you come from, friend?" he asked the donkey. "And whose were you?" Lucky offered no answers, just nuzzled at Eli's coat pocket, looking for the apple slices he'd learned to expect. That afternoon, Eli drove into town with Lucky riding in the truck bed. The donkey had loaded up easily, as if truck rides were nothing new. Doc Pritchard's clinic occupied a low building at the south end of Main Street, with a painted sign that still bore the name of Doc's father, who'd run the practice before him. 3 generations of Pritchards had tended to the animals of Pine Ridge and the surrounding ranches. Doc was in his 60s, a compact man with hands that remained steady despite arthritis that made every winter harder than the last. He looked up from paperwork when Eli walked in, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Eli Boone. Heard you rescued yourself a donkey. News travels. Mary Chen mentioned it. Said you've been buying extra oats." Doc stood, pulling on his coat. "Let's have a look at him." They went outside where Lucky waited patiently in the truck bed. Doc ran practiced hands over the donkey, checking teeth, eyes, legs, listening to heart and lungs. "He's in good shape now. Might be 8, 9 years old. Well trained from what I can tell. Not wild, that's certain. Found this in his mane." Eli held out the compass. Doc took it, turned it over, read the initials. His expression changed. Something flickered across his face that might have been recognition. "JM," he said quietly. "Could be coincidence, but what?" Doc handed the compass back. "Jonas Mackenzie went missing about 6 weeks ago. He was a prospector, worked claims up in the high country. Had a donkey with him, I know that for certain, because I treated the animal for a stone bruise back in October. Jonas brought him down from his camp for the winter, was planning to head back up come spring. What happened to him? Blizzard hit the end of November. Big one, you remember. Dropped 3 feet of snow in 2 days. Search and rescue went looking when Jonas didn't come back to town, but they didn't find anything. Figured he got caught out in it. Mountain country in a blizzard." Doc shook his head. "Man doesn't stand much chance." Eli studied the compass in his hand, feeling the weight of it differently now. "He have family?" "Not that anyone here knows of. Kept to himself mostly. Came through Pine Ridge maybe 10 times a year for supplies, paid in cash. Didn't talk much about his business. You know the type." Eli did know the type. Montana drew men who wanted to be left alone, who had reasons for not caring to share their stories. He'd respected that in others because he wanted the same respect himself. He ever say anything about finding something? About a strike? Doc's eyes sharpened. "You been hearing stories?" "Just asking." "There's always stories, Eli. Every prospector who ever worked these mountains believed he was one good day away from striking it rich. Jonas was no different. Last time I saw him, he seemed excited about something, but he didn't say what. That was late October, right before he headed back up. Then the blizzard hit and—" Doc spread his hands. "That was that." Eli pocketed the compass and thanked Doc for the examination. As he drove home with Lucky in the truck bed, his mind turned over what he'd learned. A prospector who disappeared in the same blizzard that had left Lucky tangled in barbed wire. A compass with coordinates that meant something, pointed somewhere. A donkey that had survived when his owner likely hadn't. Back at the cabin, Eli sat at his kitchen table and opened his old atlas, the one Sarah had used to plan road trips they'd taken, back when they could afford such things. He found the coordinates from the compass. 47 degrees 23 Zellers north, and 14 degrees 51 west. The location sat deep in the Cabinet Mountains, 30 miles north of Pine Ridge, in country so remote that even the logging companies had mostly given up on it. Whatever Jonas Mackenzie had been looking for, he'd been looking in hard country. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the compass, about a man who'd gone into the mountains and never come back, about the donkey that had somehow found its way down to lower ground. Animals had instincts. Lucky had survived because some deep knowledge told him to head down, to seek help, to keep moving. Had Jonas Mackenzie sent him away when he knew he was in trouble? Or had Lucky simply wandered off after whatever had happened? Eli got up and made coffee at 3 in the morning, standing at his window watching snow fall in the darkness. Through the window, he could see the shed where Lucky bedded down for the night. The donkey had changed something in Eli's life, given him a reason to wake up with purpose, to care about something beyond just making it through another winter. That should have been enough. Should have been plenty, but the compass pulled at him. The coordinates pulled at him. The mystery of Jonas Mackenzie pulled at him. He tried to dismiss it. What business was it of his what some prospector had been chasing? The man was gone, likely dead in the mountains somewhere. The compassionate thing would be to notify, search and rescue. Tell them about the compass, about Lucky, about the connection between them. Let them handle it. But Eli kept thinking about those coordinates, about what they might mark, about why a prospector would have them engraved on his compass. You didn't engrave coordinates on a brass compass unless they meant something important, unless they marked something worth finding. In the morning, after his coffee, after he'd fed Lucky and checked the donkey's water, Eli made a decision. He would follow Lucky. The donkey kept trying to head north whenever Eli turned him out to exercise, kept looking toward the mountains, kept acting like he wanted to return to something. Or somewhere, maybe Lucky knew something Eli didn't. Maybe the donkey could lead him to answers about Jonas Mackenzie, about what the man had been seeking, about what those coordinates marked. Or maybe Eli just needed something to chase, something to care about beyond the slow routine of surviving winter in Montana. Maybe he needed a reason to feel like his life still held purpose, still held the possibility of meaning. Either way, come the weekend, he would pack supplies and follow the donkey north. He would see where Lucky wanted to go. He would see what secrets the mountains held. It was foolish, probably. Sarah would have called it dangerous. But Sarah wasn't here to stop him, and the compass in his pocket felt like an invitation he couldn't ignore. Eli spent the week preparing for the journey with the methodical care of a man who understood that mountains didn't forgive carelessness. He packed his old canvas rucksack with supplies, dried food, matches in a waterproof container, a first aid kit, extra wool socks, rope, his hunting knife. He checked his compass against the one from Lucky's mane and found them both pointing true north. In his truck he loaded emergency gear, a sleeping bag rated for 0 degrees, a small tent, a hatchet, water purification tablets. Tom Henderson noticed the preparations when Eli came to work. "You planning something? Taking a few days? Personal business." Tom studied him with the frankness of a man who'd known Eli for 15 years. "This about that donkey?" "Might be. Mountain country this time of year isn't forgiving, Eli. You know that." "I do." Tom was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You need anything, you let me know. And Eli, be careful. Sarah wouldn't want you taking foolish risks." Eli didn't answer that, but he thought about it as he drove home. Sarah wouldn't have wanted him taking risks, but she also wouldn't have wanted him to stop living. There was a difference between caution and surrender, and Eli had been surrendering to grief for 3 years. Maybe it was time to take a risk again. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold, good weather for traveling. Eli loaded Lucky into the truck bed with his gear and drove north on logging roads that deteriorated into little more than tracks. When the road finally ended, he parked and continued on foot with Lucky walking beside him. The donkey moved with purpose, ears forward, as if he recognized this country. Eli followed, breaking trail through snow that came halfway up his shins. The compass stayed in his pocket, but he checked it periodically against landmarks. They were heading northwest, climbing steadily into higher country where the pines grew thick and the silence felt absolute. Lucky moved like he'd traveled this route before, stepping surely on ground that looked the same in every direction. Eli trusted the donkey's instincts more than his own. Animals remembered trails, remembered scent markers invisible to human senses. They walked for 3 hours, stopping only to rest and drink from Eli's canteen. The donkey accepted water from Eli's cupped hands, patient and trusting. Around noon, Lucky's behavior changed. His ears pricked forward, and he brayed, once, twice, the sound echoing through the forest. Then he quickened his pace, pulling ahead of Eli, following something only he could sense. Eli followed, his breath coming harder in the thin air and exertion. They crested a ridge and descended into a narrow valley where a frozen creek wound between snow-covered rocks. Lucky moved along the creek bed until he stopped at a small clearing beneath an old-growth Douglas fir. The donkey pawed at the snow, braying again, more insistent now. Eli came up beside him and saw what Lucky had found, the remains of a campsite. Most of it was buried under snow, but Eli could make out the stone ring of a fire pit, the flattened area where a tent had stood, the scattered remnants of rope and canvas half buried in drifts. This had been someone's base camp, abandoned or forgotten. This Jonas's place. Eli asked the donkey. Lucky pawed at the snow again, near the base of the Douglas fir. Eli knelt and began digging with his gloved hands. Under 6 inches of snow, he found the hollow at the tree's base, a natural cavity where the trunk had rotted and split. Inside, protected from the weather, was a leather satchel. Eli pulled it out carefully. The leather was water-stained but intact, closed with a brass buckle that still worked. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a notebook, a prospector's journal, bound in weather-beaten leather with pages filled with neat handwriting. Eli sat back against the tree and opened the journal to the first page. The writing was clear, the hand of someone who valued keeping records, Jonas Mackenzie. Field Journal. Cabinet Mountains Survey, April 1964. The journal was old, 60 years of recorded observations about the mountains, about promising sites, about test holes and assays. Eli flipped through pages of technical notes, sketches of rock formations, coordinates and measurements that meant little to him. But as he reached the more recent entries, the tone changed. September 2024. Found promising quartz exposure on the north face of Shepherd's Ridge. Visible mineralization. Could be silver or lead. Will return with proper equipment. October 2024. The vein is real. Run 3 separate assays, all positive for silver. This is what I've been looking for. 60 years in these mountains and finally something substantial. Filed claim paperwork. Coordinates 47°3N, 114°51W. Not telling anyone, not yet. Need to be certain. The entries grew more excited, more confident, detailing the extent of the vein, the purity of the ore, calculations about potential value. Jonas Mackenzie had found something real, something significant. The dates continued through late October, November 15, 2024. Storm coming. Can feel it in the air. Should head down to Pine Ridge, but want one more day at the site. One more day to be sure. Lucky is nervous. Animals always know. November 16, 2024. Storm hit harder than expected. 3 feet of snow overnight. Temperature dropping. Made it back to camp, but visibility is near 0. Can't risk traveling in this. We'll wait it out. November 18, 2024. 4th day of storm. Running low on firewood. Lucky won't settle. Keeps trying to head down the mountain. Maybe I should listen to him. Hard to think clearly. So cold. November 19th, 2024. Sent Lucky away. Couldn't keep him here. Not enough food for both of us. Pointed him downhill and slapped his hindquarters. Hope he makes it. Smart animal. Deserves better than dying up here with a foolish old man. The silver doesn't matter now. Nothing matters except being warm. Can't feel my feet anymore. The entry stopped mid-sentence. The rest of the page was blank. Eli turned to the next page, empty. And the next? The journal ended there, in the middle of November, in the middle of that killing storm. Eli sat under the Douglas fir for a long time, holding the journal, understanding what had happened. Jonas Mackenzie had found his silver, had filed his claim, and had died trying to spend one more day at the site before winter truly set in. Lucky had survived because Mackenzie had the presence of mind, even in his dying, to send the donkey away. The compass made sense now. Jonas had engraved the claim coordinates on it, the most important information he possessed. Marked on the instrument he trusted most, Eli looked at Lucky, who stood watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. He saved you, didn't he? Made sure you had a chance, even when he knew he didn't. Lucky brayed softly, a sound that held sadness in it. Or maybe Eli was just projecting human emotion onto an animal. But he didn't think so. Lucky had come back here to this campsite like he was looking for someone, waiting for someone. Animals understood loss, understood absence. They grieved in their own ways. "All right, friend," Eli said, standing and packing the journal carefully in his rucksack. "Let's head back. We've got what we came for." As they started the return journey, Eli's mind worked through what he'd learned. There was a silver claim out here somewhere, marked by coordinates that might make someone wealthy. Jonas Mackenzie had died for it, or rather had died trying to verify it one more time. The claim was presumably still active, still legally filed. But to whom did it belong now? Jonas had no family that Doc Pritchard knew of. The claim might be abandoned, might be available for refiling. Eli turned that thought over in his mind during the long walk back to the truck. A fortune in silver, sitting unclaimed in the mountains. The kind of money that could change a life, that could solve problems, that could make old age comfortable instead of precarious. But beneath those thoughts ran something else, the image of Jonas Mackenzie's final journal entry, the man's last coherent act being to save his donkey. That spoke to something Eli understood, something about what mattered when you were facing the end. It wasn't the silver that mattered to Jonas in those final moments. It was making sure Lucky had a chance to survive. Eli thought about the tobacco tin in his nightstand, about Sarah's ring waiting there. What would she say about all this? What would she want him to do? He already knew the answer. Sarah had always said that doing right mattered more than doing well. She'd lived her whole life by that principle, sometimes to their financial disadvantage. But she'd slept sound at night, and so had he. The question was, what was the right thing now? Monday morning found Eli at the county land office in Kalispell, a 40-minute drive from Pine Ridge. The building was old brick, built during the Roosevelt administration, with high ceilings and the particular smell of old paper and bureaucracy. Mary Chen had offered to come with him. She had experience navigating county records from her years running the general store and dealing with business permits, but Eli had declined. This felt like something he needed to do alone. The clerk was a woman in her 50s named Judith, who looked like she'd been working in this building since those Roosevelt days. She listened to Eli's inquiry without expression, then pulled out a thick ledger book and began flipping pages. Mackenzie Jonas. Yes, we have a claim filed under that name. Cabinet Mountains, Section 14, Township 28 North, Range 29 West. Filed October 2024. Status shows as active. He's dead, Eli said. Died in the November blizzard. Judith looked up at him over her reading glasses. You have documentation of that? No official death certificate, if that's what you mean. But I found his campsite, his journal. Last entry was November 19th, and it wasn't hopeful. Without a death certificate or a body, the claim remains active, meaning claims stay registered to the filer until formally abandoned or transferred. If Mr. Mackenzie is deceased, as you say, then the claim would pass to his heirs, if any. He didn't have heirs. Not that anyone knows of. Then it becomes more complicated. The claim would remain in his name until someone petitions for it to be declared abandoned, which requires evidence of continuous absence and intent to abandon. Given that he just filed it 2 months ago, she shook her head. You'd be looking at a year minimum before you could make a case for abandonment. Eli nodded slowly. And if he does have heirs somewhere, family that didn't know about this, then it belongs to them, legally and morally. Mining claims are property. They transfer according to standard inheritance law. Judith studied him with sharp eyes that had probably seen every kind of person come through this office. You thinking of jumping this claim, Mr. Boone? No, ma'am. Just trying to understand the situation. The situation is that unless you can prove you're Jonas Mackenzie's heir or can prove the claim should be abandoned, it's not yours to touch. That's the law. Eli thanked her and left with the information he'd come for, though it wasn't the information he'd wanted. He'd hoped for something clearer, something that would make the right path obvious. Instead, he had complications and legal tangles that would take time to sort. Out Mary Chen was waiting for him at her general store when he got back to Pine Ridge. The store occupied the same building. It had for 70 years, wood floors that creaked, shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to sewing supplies to ammunition. It was the kind of store that was disappearing from rural America, replaced by distant Walmarts and Amazon deliveries. But Pine Ridge was too small, too remote for those changes yet. How'd it go? Mary asked, looking up from her account books. Eli told her what he'd learned. Mary listened, nodding, her expression thoughtful. She was in her mid-60s, had run this store since her husband died 15 years ago, and had the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of watching human nature. "So you can't touch the claim even if you wanted to," she said when he finished. "Not legally. Not without searching for heirs first, being honest about what I found, and if there are heirs, then it's theirs. The silver, the claim, all of it." Mary was quiet for a moment. "Eli, I'm going to say something, and I hope you won't take offense. But you're living on $200 a week and whatever you saved up from better years. This store is barely breaking even. I might have to close next year. Tom Henderson is one bad season from losing his ranch. We're all just hanging on here. If that claim is as rich as Jonas thought, it could change things. It could help people." "It could," Eli agreed. "If it were mine to use. Nobody would know if you didn't go looking for heirs. Nobody even knows about the claim except you." Eli met her eyes. "I'd know," Mary sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I figured you'd say that. Your Sarah raised you right, even if she got to you late in life. That evening, alone in his cabin with Lucky, bedded down in the shed, Eli sat at his kitchen table and took out the tobacco tin from his nightstand. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was Sarah's wedding ring. But beneath it, folded small, was something else, a letter she'd written to him during her final weeks in the hospital. Eli had read this letter maybe a dozen times in 3 years. Each time it hurt like new, and each time it helped him remember what mattered. He unfolded it now, careful with paper that had grown soft from handling. The handwriting was shaky. Sarah's hands had trembled near the end from the medication, but the words were clear. "My dearest Eli, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're still there. And I hope you're not sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. I know you, love. I know how you'll want to pull into your shell and just survive. But surviving isn't living, and I want you to live. Do you hear me? Live. Find something to care about. Find someone to help. Find a reason to get up that isn't just habit. We had 40 good years, you and me, and that's more than most people get. Don't let my leaving be the thing that stops you from having more years that matter. Be kind, be honest, be the man I married, the one who does right even when nobody's watching, even when it costs you something. That's the man I love. That's the man I'll be waiting for when your time comes. But until then, promise me you'll live. Promise me you'll find purpose again. Promise me you won't let grief be the only thing you feel. I love you. Always have, always will. Your Sarah." Eli folded the letter carefully and put it back in the tin with the ring. Then he sat in the quiet of his cabin and let himself cry, something he didn't do often, something he'd learned to push down and ignore. But tonight the tears came and he let them, because Sarah's words had opened something in him that needed opening. She wanted him to live. She wanted him to find purpose. She wanted him to be the man who did right even when nobody was watching. Well, nobody was watching now. Nobody except him and Lucky, and whatever part of Sarah still existed somewhere beyond this world. The silver claim could make him comfortable, could let him help his neighbors, could change his life. All he had to do was keep quiet about Jonas Mackenzie's heirs. Let the legal complications drag on, eventually file for abandonment. All he had to do was be a little bit dishonest. Just enough to justify it. Just enough to call it practical. But that wasn't the man Sarah had loved. That wasn't the man Eli wanted to be. He would look for Jonas Mackenzie's heirs. He would do everything he could to find them, to return what was rightfully theirs. And if there were no heirs, if the claim truly was abandoned and unclaimed, then maybe he could pursue it himself with a clear conscience. It would take time. It might lead nowhere. It might cost him the only chance at security he'd ever have again. But it was the right thing. And Sarah had been clear about what she wanted from him. Be kind, be honest. Be the man who does right even when it costs you something. That night, before he went to bed, Eli went out to the shed to check on Lucky. The donkey was lying in clean straw, warm and safe. When Eli entered, Lucky raised his head and brayed softly in greeting. "We're going to find them," Eli told the donkey. "We're going to find Jonas's people if he had any, and we're going to do right by him, because that's what he did for you. He saved you when he was dying. That deserves to be honored." Lucky looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes, and Eli could have sworn the donkey understood. Could have sworn Lucky approved. He went back to his cabin and slept better than he had in weeks, even though he'd just decided to give away a fortune he didn't yet have. Sometimes doing right made you poor, but it always let you sleep sound. The search for Jonas Mackenzie's heirs took Eli down paths he'd never traveled before. He started with the basics: obituary searches online at the library, calls to county records in places where the prospector had previously registered claims, inquiries with mining associations. Mary Chen helped when she could, patient with technology that Eli didn't quite trust. Every lead went nowhere. Jonas Mackenzie had moved through life leaving barely a trace. No children listed anywhere, no surviving siblings, no next of kin mentioned in any document Eli could find. The man had been a ghost, living on the margins, leaving nothing behind but mineral claims and a leather journal. 2 weeks into the search, Eli knew he had to return to the mountains. The coordinates in Jonas's journal were specific, and there was only one way to verify what the prospector had claimed to find: go to the site itself. If there was really silver there, really something of value, then the search for heirs mattered even more. If there was nothing, if Jonas had been deluded or mistaken, then this whole question became academic. He prepared for the second expedition with even more care than the first. This time he was going higher, into more remote country, and he might need to do some climbing. He packed rope, proper winter climbing gear he borrowed from Tom Henderson, emergency supplies for 3 days in case weather turned bad. Lucky would go with him again. The donkey knew the way, and Eli had learned to trust that knowledge. They set out on a Saturday morning in mid-January, following the same route they'd taken before. The weather was stable. High pressure, clear skies, the kind of cold that hurt your lungs but didn't hide in clouds waiting to dump snow. The mountains stood sharp against blue sky, beautiful and indifferent. It took 4 hours to reach Jonas's base camp. From there, Lucky led them north and west, climbing steeper terrain where the trees thinned and exposed rock became more common. Eli followed, his breath coming hard in the altitude, his legs burning from the climb. He wasn't young anymore, wasn't built for this kind of exertion. But he kept moving, step after step, because turning back now would mean giving up. And he'd promised Sarah he wouldn't do that. Lucky brought them to a narrow defile between 2 peaks, a place where ancient rock had fractured and split, creating a natural passage barely wide enough for a man. The donkey brayed and pawed at the snow, insistent. "Here?" Eli asked. Lucky brayed again. Eli squeezed through the defile, scraping his shoulders on stone walls that pressed close. On the far side, the passage opened into a small cirque, a bowl-shaped depression scooped from the mountainside by long-gone glaciers. And there, on the eastern face where morning sun would hit it first, was a dark opening in the rock. The mine entrance was obvious, once you knew to look for it. A horizontal shaft maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, shored up with timber posts that showed recent work. This was Jonas Mackenzie's claim, his silver strike, the thing he'd died trying to protect. Eli approached carefully. Mining regulations required proper safety equipment, required following procedures, required things Eli didn't have. But he hadn't come all this way to turn back at the entrance. He pulled out his flashlight, a heavy maglite that Tom had loaned him, and ducked into the opening. The mine shaft extended back into darkness, sloping slightly downward. Eli moved slowly, testing each step, checking the timber supports. Jonas had done good work here. The shoring was solid, properly braced. The walls showed fresh tool marks, evidence of recent excavation. 20 feet in, the shaft opened into a small chamber where someone could stand upright. And there, in the light of Eli's flashlight, he found Jonas Mackenzie. The prospector sat with his back against the rock wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around himself. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful. The cold had preserved him. He looked like he might be sleeping, might wake up if Eli spoke loudly enough. But Eli knew death when he saw it. Jonas had made it back to his mine, had come here to die in the place that mattered most to him. "I'm sorry," Eli said quietly. "I'm sorry nobody got here in time." He stood there for a moment, paying respects to a man he'd never met but felt he knew through his journal entries. Through his final act of saving Lucky, through the care he'd taken to do this mining work properly. Jonas Mackenzie had been a careful man, a thorough man, the kind who did things right. Eli forced himself to look past the body, to examine the mine itself. The chamber showed evidence of systematic work. Test holes drilled into the walls, samples taken, careful documentation. On a flat rock that served as a makeshift table, Jonas had left his equipment, rock hammer, hand drill, collection bags, and there, exposed in the chamber wall where Jonas had been working, was the vein. Even Eli, who knew nothing about geology, could see it. A band of lighter rock cut through the darker stone at a steep angle, maybe 8 inches wide, running up and disappearing into the ceiling and down into the floor. The surface glittered faintly in the flashlight beam, mineralization that looked like frost or crystals embedded in the stone. Eli carefully chipped a sample from the exposed vein, using Jonas's own rock hammer. The piece that came away was heavy, heavier than regular rock should be. He examined it in the light, seeing the dark veins and bright flecks that might be silver, might be fool's gold, might be nothing. He collected several samples and placed them in a collection bag, labeling it with the date and location. Then he turned his attention to the harder task, what to do about Jonas Mackenzie's body. It would be wrong to leave him here, wrong to let him remain in this cold darkness forever. But moving a body from this location, through that narrow defile, down the mountain, that was beyond Eli's capability alone. He would need help, would need to notify the sheriff, would need to bring in search and rescue to recover Jonas properly. Eli took out a tarp from his pack and covered Jonas respectfully, weighing down the corners with rocks. "I'll come back," he promised. "With help. We'll get you down, give you a proper burial. You deserve that much." Outside, Lucky waited in the cirque. The donkey brayed when Eli emerged, a sound that held questioning in it, as if asking about his former owner. "He's in there," Eli said. "He died as close to his find as he could get." I think that would have mattered to him. The return journey down the mountain took less time than the climb up, but it felt heavier somehow. Eli carried Jonas's samples in his pack, along with the weight of what he'd seen, what he'd found. A dead man in a mine, a silver vein that might be worth a fortune, and a moral question that had somehow gotten more complicated instead of simpler. Because now Eli knew the claim was real. Knew there was silver there, enough to be worth something, maybe worth a great deal. And he still had no heirs to give it to, no way to resolve the question of ownership that Sarah's letter demanded he handle honestly. That night, back in his cabin, Eli laid out the rock samples on his table and studied them under lamplight. They looked promising, looked real, but he needed expert verification before he could know for certain what Jonas had found. In the morning he would call the sheriff about Jonas's body. He would do the right thing there, the thing that honor demanded. But the silver, the question of the claim, of what to do with it, of how to honor Jonas's memory while also acknowledging his own desperate need, that question remained unanswered. Eli took out Sarah's letter again and read it in the lamplight. "Be kind, be honest, be the man who does right, even when it costs you something." The words were clear, but the application was muddied by reality, by the fact that doing right might mean walking away from the only chance at security he would ever have. He put the letter away and went to check on Lucky one more time before bed. The donkey stood in his shed, warm and safe, living proof that sometimes saving one life could change everything. "We're going to figure this out," Eli told him. "One step at a time. We're going to do right by Jonas and by you, and somehow we'll make it work." Lucky nuzzled his hand, patient and trusting. And Eli headed back to his cabin, carrying samples that might be worthless or might be worth millions, knowing that either way, the right path forward demanded more courage than he sometimes felt he had. The sheriff's department sent a recovery team 2 days later, and they brought Jonas Mackenzie down from the mountain on a basket litter. Eli met them at the trailhead, guiding them to the cirque and the mine entrance, standing witness as they treated Jonas with the respect the dead deserved. The coroner ruled it death by exposure, hypothermia in the November blizzard. Just as the journal had suggested, word spread through Pine Ridge, the way news always did in small towns, quietly at first, then gaining momentum. Eli Boone had found the lost prospector, had followed a donkey into the mountains, had discovered a mine that Jonas claimed was worth something. The details grew in the telling, as details always did, until you couldn't quite separate fact from speculation. Eli brought his rock samples to a geologist in Missoula, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who specialized in precious metals. She examined the samples under magnification, ran tests, checked them against known silver ore characteristics. When she gave him her report, her expression was serious. "This is high-grade silver ore, Mr. Boone, very high grade. The mineralization is extensive based on these samples. If the vein runs as deep as these samples suggest," she paused, "this could be a significant find. Not huge by modern mining standards, but for an independent operation. This could be worth several million dollars. Several million dollars." The number sat in Eli's mind like a foreign object, too large to quite comprehend. He'd never had money, had never expected to have money. $200 a week had been his reality for so long that millions felt like a different language entirely. But Dr. Reeves had more to say. "You need to be careful with this information. Word gets out about a rich strike, you'll have people coming out of the woodwork. Investors, companies, people claiming relationships to the original filer. Mining claims attract opportunists like blood attracts sharks." She was right about that. Within a week of Dr. Reeves's report, Eli started getting visitors. First was a man in an expensive suit from a mining company in Denver. He sat in Eli's cabin, uncomfortable on the old furniture, and made his pitch. "We'd like to buy the claim outright. Cash payment right now. We handle all the development, all the legal complications. You walk away clean with more money than you'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranch work." Eli listened politely, then declined. The man raised his offer. Eli declined again. The man left, but Eli knew he wouldn't be the last. Then came the relatives, distant cousins Eli barely remembered from his childhood, an uncle he'd thought was dead, even Sarah's niece from Spokane, who he hadn't heard from in 5 years. They all had heard about his good fortune, all wanted to reconnect, all had reasons why they deserved to share in whatever came from the claim. Eli treated them with courtesy, but made no promises. The claim wasn't his to share. It legally belonged to Jonas Mackenzie or to Jonas's heirs, and until that question was resolved, nothing else mattered. Mary Chen understood the pressure he was under. She brought him coffee one afternoon at the general store, sitting across from him at the table she kept in back for friends. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing. Lots of folks suddenly very interested in your well-being. Seems that way." Mary was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Eli, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to do anything foolish about it." He waited. "The store is failing. The building lease comes up for renewal in 6 months, and the landlord wants to triple the rent. Some developer from California bought up half the properties on Main Street. They want to turn Pine Ridge into a tourist destination, boutique shops, wine bars, vacation rentals. Places like my store don't fit that vision." She met his eyes. "I can't afford triple rent. I'll have to close." Eli felt that news settle heavy in his chest. The general store had been part of Pine Ridge for 70 years. It was where people bought supplies, got their mail, caught up on news. It was the heart of the community in ways that went beyond simple commerce. What about buying the building? The developer won't sell. He wants the whole block. Mary smiled sadly. I've had a good run. Longer than most. But sometimes things just end. That evening, Tom Henderson stopped by Eli's cabin. The rancher looked tired, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. He accepted the coffee Eli offered and sat at the kitchen table, turning the cup in his hands. Need to talk to you about something, Tom said. And I'm only doing it because we've known each other 15 years, and you've always been straight with me. Go ahead. The ranch is in trouble. Bad year last year. Lost cattle to disease, grain prices were down, had to replace equipment I couldn't afford to replace. Bank is calling the note. I've got 30 days to come up with $80,000 or they foreclose. $80,000. Less than 3% of what Dr. Reeves thought the silver claim might be worth. But to Tom Henderson it was everything. His livelihood, his legacy, his entire life's work. I've tried everything, Tom continued. Refinancing, loans from other banks, selling off pieces of equipment. Nothing works. The bank wants its money. He looked at Eli. I'm not here to ask for charity, but if there's any way you could use some help at that mine, if you need hauling, equipment work, anything, I'd work for whatever you could pay. Just enough to hold on until spring, until prices come back. Eli saw the pride it took for Tom to ask, the humiliation of having to admit failure. Tom, the claim isn't mine yet. Legally it belongs to Jonas Mackenzie or his heirs. I'm still trying to sort that out, but if it does become yours, if it does, you'll be the first person I hire. You have my word on that. Tom nodded, set down his coffee cup and stood. Fair enough. And Eli, I appreciate you being honest about the situation. Most folks would have made promises they couldn't keep. After Tom left, Eli sat alone in his cabin and thought about what he'd learned. Mary's store closing. Tom's ranch facing foreclosure. These were good people, people who'd been part of this community for decades, facing ruin, while Eli sat on knowledge of a fortune he couldn't yet touch. He opened the account book Tom had accidentally left on the table, a leather-bound ledger showing the ranch's finances. Eli flipped through pages of careful record-keeping, seeing the story of Tom's struggle laid out in numbers. Income down, expenses up, the gap growing wider with each passing month. On the last page, circled in red ink, was the foreclosure date. February 15th, 3 weeks away. Eli closed the ledger and added it to his growing collection of evidence that the world needed the silver claim resolved, needed him to figure out what to do, needed him to act. But how could he act when the fundamental question remained unanswered? That night, Doc Pritchard called. Eli, got a minute? Sure, Doc. Wanted to let you know I'm probably closing the clinic. Equipment is wearing out, can't afford repairs, and insurance premiums keep going up. I can't make the numbers work anymore. The vet's voice carried resignation. Thought you should know, since Lucky might need care eventually. You'll have to take him to Kalispell. Hour drive, but they've got a good facility there. Another piece of Pine Ridge crumbling away. Another person Eli cared about forced to give up something important. After the call, Eli went out to the shed to check on Lucky. The donkey greeted him with a soft bray, nuzzling at his pocket for treats. Eli had brought an apple cut into slices. He fed them to Lucky one at a time while he talked. Everyone's depending on something I don't have yet, something I might never have. And even if I do get it, I can't help them all, not without giving up the security I'd need for myself. He paused. Sarah would know what to do. She always knew. But she's not here, and I'm just a 61-year-old man who's in over his head. Lucky munched his apple slices, patient and calm. Animals didn't worry about money or moral dilemmas. They lived in the moment, trusted that food would come, trusted that care would follow. Sometimes Eli envied that simplicity. He returned to his cabin and took out Sarah's letter one more time, reading it by lamplight for perhaps the 20th time since finding it. Be kind, be honest. Be the man who does right, even when it costs you something. The words were clear. The application remained murky, because doing right might mean searching indefinitely for heirs that didn't exist, letting good people lose everything while he held to legal principles that might not matter. But doing wrong, claiming the fortune without a proper search, using it to help others, but built on a foundation of dishonesty that would violate everything Sarah had asked of him. Eli folded the letter and put it away. Tomorrow he would renew his search for Jonas Mackenzie's heirs. He would make more calls, send more inquiries, exhaust every possible avenue. And if he found nothing, if Jonas truly had died alone with no one to claim what was his, then Eli would have to decide what doing right actually meant in a world where the right answer wasn't clear. But tonight he was just tired. Tired of questions without answers, tired of pressure, tired of being the man everyone looked to for solutions he didn't have. He climbed into bed and tried to sleep, thinking about silver mines and general stores and ranch foreclosures, about donkeys and dead prospectors, and all the ways that life got complicated when you tried to do the right thing. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by the postal carrier with the kind of formality that suggested its importance. Eli signed for it at his door. Seeing the return address, Brennan and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Denver, Colorado, he sat at his kitchen table and opened it carefully, pulling out several pages of official letterhead and legal documents. The first page began formally, with the kind of language lawyers used when they wanted to sound important. Dear Mr. Boone, we represent Rebecca Mackenzie in matters regarding the estate of Jonas Mackenzie, deceased. It has come to our attention through county records that you have been inquiring about Mr. Mackenzie's mining claim in Cabinet Mountains. We write to inform you that Ms. Mackenzie is the sole legal heir to Jonas Mackenzie's estate, including all mining claims, properties, and assets. Please find enclosed documentation establishing Ms. Mackenzie's claim. She will be traveling to Pine Ridge within the week to view the property and assess next steps. We request that you refrain from taking any action regarding the claim until this matter is resolved. Sincerely, James Brennan. Iskemdas. Attached were copies of legal documents, a birth certificate showing Rebecca Ann Mackenzie, born 1990, daughter of Robert Mackenzie and Claire Sullivan. An obituary for Robert Mackenzie, died 1995, survived by his daughter Rebecca and his father Jonas. Social Security records. Her family tree documented and notarized. Eli sat back in his chair, the papers spread before him. Jonas Mackenzie had a granddaughter, a living heir who had every legal right to the claim, to the silver, to everything Eli had been struggling with for weeks. His first emotion wasn't disappointment. It was relief, pure, overwhelming relief. The decision was out of his hands now. He wouldn't have to choose between honesty and helping his friends. He wouldn't have to navigate the moral complexity of claiming something that might not be his. Rebecca Mackenzie would inherit her grandfather's find, and Eli could return to his simple life of fence work and survival, except that simple life now included watching Tom lose his ranch, watching Mary close her store, watching Doc Pritchard shut down his clinic, watching the community he'd lived in for 40 years slowly disintegrate. He told no one about the letter. Not yet. He wanted time to think, to adjust to this new reality before other people complicated it with their opinions and needs. Rebecca Mackenzie arrived in Pine Ridge 4 days later, driving a 10-year-old Honda with Colorado plates. She pulled up to Eli's cabin on a Saturday afternoon, and he watched her from the window as she got out of the car, a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in jeans and a practical winter coat with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, looked like someone who'd been carrying weight for a long time. Eli opened the door before she could knock. Miss Mackenzie, Mr. Boone. I'm Rebecca. She extended her hand and her grip was firm, her palm calloused. Not a soft city person then. Someone who worked with her hands. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Come in. Coffee? Please. They sat at Eli's kitchen table, the same place where he'd read Jonas's journal, where he'd studied the rock samples, where he'd agonized over decisions. Rebecca cupped her hands around the coffee mug like she needed the warmth, and when she looked at him, her eyes were red-rimmed, recent tears not quite hidden. I need to tell you about my grandfather, she said. Because I think you deserve to understand who he was, why I'm here. Eli listened while Rebecca talked. She told him about Jonas Mackenzie, a man who'd raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 5. A man who'd been gruff and distant at first, who'd struggled with suddenly having a child to care for, but who'd learned to be gentle, to be present, to be the grandfather she needed. He'd worked construction during the school year, so she could have stability, then spent summers prospecting, taking her with him sometimes, teaching her about rocks and minerals and the mountains. He promised me that someday he'd strike it rich, Rebecca said, her voice catching. Told me all those summers wandering around in the mountains would pay off, would be worth it. I never believed him. I thought it was just, I don't know, his dream, the thing that kept him going. But I loved him for dreaming it. She was quiet for a moment, wiping at her eyes. He died 3 years ago. That's what I thought. He told me he was going to try one more season, one more push. Said he had a good feeling about this claim. That was October. Then the blizzard hit and he never called. I reported him missing, but search and rescue didn't find anything. They told me he probably died in the storm. I had him declared deceased, settled his affairs, what little there was. Closed out his bank account, paid off his debts. There was nothing left, just some old prospecting equipment and a storage locker full of rock samples. Eli wanted to correct her. 3 years ago would be 2022, but Jonas had died just 2 months ago. But he held his tongue, letting her finish. Then last month I got a letter from the county land office. Said there'd been inquiries about Jonas Mackenzie's mining claim, filed in October 2024. I thought it was a mistake. She stopped, steadied herself. But it wasn't a mistake, was it? He wasn't dead 3 years ago. He was alive. He kept prospecting. And he found something, Eli finally understood. He never told you he was still alive. No. I buried an empty coffin, Mr. Boone. I grieved for 3 years for a man who was still out there, still chasing his dream, and he never once thought to call me, to let me know. The pain in her voice was sharp as broken glass. Why would he do that? Why would he let me think he was dead? Eli didn't have answers, but he had guesses. Some men get so caught up in what they're chasing that they forget what they have. Or maybe he was ashamed he'd been gone so long, ashamed he'd let you down. By the time he wanted to reach out, maybe too much time had passed. Maybe he thought you'd be better off without him, but I wasn't better off. I needed him. Rebecca wiped her eyes roughly. And now he's really gone, and I never got to tell him. She broke down then, and Eli sat quiet, letting her cry, understanding that grief wasn't something you fixed with words. After a while, she composed herself, straightened in her chair. I'm sorry. This isn't your burden. You loved him. That's not a burden. Rebecca nodded, took a shaky breath. The lawyer said you found his body. Found the mine. Can you tell me what happened? Eli told her everything. Finding Lucky in the barbed wire, following the donkey into the mountains, discovering Jonas's campsite and journal, the second expedition to the mine itself. He described finding Jonas there, peaceful, as if he'd simply fallen asleep. He told her about the silver vein, about Dr. Reeves's assessment, about everything Jonas had been trying to achieve. When he finished, Rebecca sat silent for a long moment. So it was real. He really found it, he did. And right before he died, he sent Lucky away, saved the donkey's life when he knew his own was ending. Your grandfather was a good man, Miss Mackenzie. That much I can tell you for certain. I want to see it. The mine where he died, it's a hard trip, I don't care. I need to see it. Eli understood that too. He nodded. We'll go tomorrow, weather permitting. I'll show you everything. After Rebecca left to find lodging in town, Mary Chen would put her up in the apartment above the store. Eli sat alone with his thoughts. The appearance of Jonas's heir should have been simple. Hand over the claim, step away, return to normal life. But nothing about this situation was simple, because he'd seen the car Rebecca drove, old, running rough, probably on its last legs. He'd seen her clothes, clean but worn, mended in places. He'd noticed her hands, calloused, cracked from work. This wasn't a wealthy woman coming to claim a fortune. This was someone struggling, Someone who needed the silver claim as much as Tom Henderson needed to save his ranch, as much as Mary needed to keep her store. That night, alone in his cabin, Eli faced the hardest temptation he'd ever known. He could say he'd found nothing at the mine. Could say Jonas's journal was wrong, the claim worthless. Rebecca would never know the difference. She'd never been to the site, had no way to verify. She'd leave disappointed but no worse off than she was now. And Eli could pursue the claim himself, use the fortune to help his community, to honor Sarah's memory by building something good. It would be so easy. One small lie, one omission of truth, and everyone would benefit except Rebecca, who would continue her hard life, never knowing what she'd lost. Eli took out Sarah's letter and read it again. Be the man who does right even when it costs you something. This would cost him everything. His one chance at security, his ability to help his friends, maybe his last opportunity to build something meaningful before he got too old to matter. But it was still the right thing. Rebecca was Jonas's heir, legal and moral. She deserved the truth, deserved her inheritance, deserved to know that her grandfather's dream hadn't been wasted. In the morning, Eli would take her to the mine. He would show her the silver vein. He would give her Jonas's journal and explain everything the claim could be worth. And then he would walk away, returning to his $200-a-week existence, watching his friends struggle and fall while he remained poor but honest. Sarah would approve. That thought was his only comfort as he tried to sleep that night, knowing that doing right sometimes meant losing everything, and choosing it anyway. They set out for the mountains at dawn. Eli and Rebecca and Lucky. The donkey had brayed in recognition when Rebecca arrived, had nuzzled her hand like he remembered something. Whether Jonas's scent still lingered on her or some deeper memory connected them, Eli couldn't say. But Lucky accepted her immediately, and that counted for something. The hike took most of the morning. Rebecca was fit, despite her obvious exhaustion, kept pace without complaint even when the terrain turned difficult. She asked questions about Jonas's final days, about the journal entries, about how Lucky had survived. Eli answered honestly, holding nothing back. If he was going to give her the truth, it would be the complete truth. When they reached the cirque and she saw the mine entrance, Rebecca stopped, her hand pressed to her mouth. He really did it. He actually found something. He did. Come on. I'll show you. Inside the mine, Eli had brought a better lantern this time, a battery-powered LED that filled the space with steady light. Jonas's body was gone, recovered by the county and awaiting burial arrangements. But his equipment remained, and the silver vein gleamed in the rock wall exactly as Eli remembered. Rebecca moved forward slowly, reverently, her fingers tracing the exposed mineral. Is this really silver? According to the geologist I consulted, high-grade ore, potentially worth several $1 million if the vein runs deep enough. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, just standing there with her hand on the rock where her grandfather had worked. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. He was right. All those years, all those summers, all that hope, he was right all along. He was. And he died knowing it. That's something. They sat outside the mine in the weak winter sunlight, sharing the lunch Eli had packed, sandwiches and coffee from a thermos. Lucky grazed on sparse vegetation poking through the snow, content in this place that had once been his home. What will you do with it? Eli asked. The claim? Rebecca looked out across the mountains, her expression thoughtful. I'm a teacher, Mr. Boone, 5th grade in Aurora. I make $42,000 a year. I have a daughter, Emma, she's 8. We live in a 1-bedroom apartment because that's all I can afford. Last year when Emma got sick, I had to choose between taking her to the doctor or paying the electricity bill. She turned to face him. Do you know what several $1 million would mean to someone like me? I can imagine. Security, safety, a future for Emma that isn't just scraping by. College paid for. A house, maybe. Not worrying every month whether I can afford groceries. She paused. It would change everything. Eli nodded, understanding. This was what he'd been preparing himself for, watching someone else get the security he'd briefly dreamed of having. knowing it was right but feeling the loss anyway. But here's what I keep thinking about, Rebecca continued. My grandfather spent 60 years in these mountains. He died doing what he loved, but he died alone. He sacrificed relationships, sacrificed family, sacrificed me for this dream. And now I have it, and it feels—" She struggled for words. "It feels like blood money somehow. Like I'm profiting from his death, from his isolation. He'd want you to have it. Want you to be secure. Maybe, but I keep thinking, what would make this mean something? What would honor him properly?" She looked at Eli directly. "You saved Lucky. You could have left him in that barbed wire, but you didn't. You found my grandfather when no one else was looking. You tracked down his claim, verified it was real. You searched for his heirs when you could have just claimed it yourself. My lawyer told me that you had every legal justification to file for the claim by abandonment. But you didn't," Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I did what was right. Exactly. And that matters." Rebecca took a breath. "I want to propose something. A partnership. 60% mine, 40% yours. We develop the claim together ethically, properly. We both get security, and we both get to honor my grandfather's legacy by doing this the right way." The offer hit Eli like a physical blow. 40% of several $1,000,000, more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranch work. Security for his old age. The ability to help Tom, to help Mary, to help everyone who was counting on him. Everything he'd given up by doing right suddenly offered back to him. "I can't accept that," he said automatically. "Why not?" "Because the claim is yours, your inheritance. I have no right to it. You have every right. You found it. You verified it. You protected it when you could have stolen it." Rebecca's voice was firm. "Mr. Boone, I've been poor my whole life. I know what desperation feels like. I know what it means to need something so badly that you'd compromise your principles to get it. But you didn't compromise. That kind of integrity deserves to be rewarded. Your grandfather died for this claim, and you honored him by doing right by it. That matters to me. It should matter to you, too." She pulled out a piece of paper, general store stationery, probably given to her by Mary. "I wrote this up last night. A partnership agreement. Simple, straightforward. We split costs and profits 60-40. We develop the mine together, make decisions together. We do this right." Eli read the handwritten document, seeing the careful terms Rebecca had laid out. It was fair, maybe more than fair. It would give him security, give him resources to help others, give him the ability to build something meaningful in the years he had left. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course. Take your time." But as they hiked back down the mountain that afternoon, Eli's mind was already working through the implications. With 40%, he could save Tom's ranch, could help Mary keep her store, could fund Doc Pritchard's clinic repairs, could do all the things Sarah would have wanted him to do. And he could do it honestly, through legitimate partnership with Jonas's heir, built on a foundation of integrity rather than compromise. That night, back in town, he met with Tom Henderson and Mary Chen, told them about Rebecca, about the partnership offer, about what it could mean. Their reactions were immediate relief mixed with disbelief. "You could save the ranch?" Tom asked. "I could. If we develop the mine right, if the vein is as rich as it appears. Yes, I could." Mary was quiet for a moment. "And you almost walked away from all of this, almost gave it up entirely because Jonas had an heir." "I did. She shook her head. "That's the kind of man Sarah loved. The kind who'd choose right over easy every single time." Eli worked with Rebecca over the next week to establish the partnership officially. They hired a mining consultant, an ethical operator named Frank Sullivan, who specialized in small-scale, sustainable operations. Frank examined the site, ran tests, verified Dr. Reeves's assessment. The vein was real, was substantial, was worth developing properly. They filed the partnership papers with the county, established an LLC, set up proper insurance and safety protocols. They would develop the mine slowly, responsibly, hiring local workers, following environmental regulations. This wouldn't be a strip mining operation that destroyed the land and left nothing behind. It would be thoughtful, measured, sustainable. Rebecca moved to Pine Ridge temporarily, staying in Mary's apartment, making arrangements to have Emma join her once school let out for summer. The girl had never met her great-grandfather, but she would inherit his legacy, would know his story, would understand what he'd worked for. Tom Henderson got the first contract, hauling ore from the mine site to processing facilities. Eli paid off his ranch debt directly from the partnership's initial capital, structured as an advance against future work. Tom's relief was visible, physical. The weight of potential loss lifted from shoulders that had carried it too long. Mary's store got investment capital to buy her building outright from the developer, who was willing to sell one property to maintain access to the others. The store would remain, would continue serving Pine Ridge, would stay the community hub it had always been. Doc Pritchard's clinic received funding for equipment repairs and upgrades. The veterinary practice would survive, would expand, would serve the region better than before. Everything was coming together, was working out better than Eli had dared hope. The silver claim was being developed properly. Jonas's granddaughter had her inheritance. The community was being strengthened rather than destroyed. And Eli had his security while maintaining his integrity. Then the mining company made its move. It started small, a representative showing up at the mine site, asking questions, taking photos. Then formal communications from Frontier Extraction Corp, expressing strong interest in acquiring the claim. The offers started at twice what Dr. Reeves had estimated the mine was worth. When Eli and Rebecca declined, the offers increased. But along with the offers came pressure. Veiled warnings about the complexity of independent mining operations. Suggestions that accidents happened to small operators who didn't know what they were doing. Implications that permits might be difficult to obtain without proper corporate backing. Frank Sullivan recognized the tactics immediately. They do this all the time. Find small operators, pressure them to sell cheap or face manufactured obstacles. It's legal harassment barely. A town meeting was called at the Dusty Boot Saloon, the only space large enough to hold everyone. Frontier Extraction sent representatives, men in suits who spoke smoothly about community partnership and economic development, while making thinly veiled threats about what would happen. If Pine Ridge didn't cooperate, Eli stood up, his voice cutting through the corporate doublespeak. We're not selling. The mine will be operated independently properly for the benefit of this community, not for some corporation's quarterly profits. The representative's smile didn't waver. Mr. Boone, I don't think you understand the realities of modern mining. Independent operations face significant challenges, regulatory hurdles, safety inspections, environmental reviews. These things can take years to resolve. Or they can be resolved quickly with the right partnerships. It was a threat disguised as advice. Everyone in the room heard it clearly. That night, there was a fire at the mine entrance. Quick response by Tom and several volunteers prevented major damage, but the message was clear. Frontier Extraction wasn't going to accept no for an answer. Rebecca was terrified, especially for Emma, who would arrive in 2 weeks. Maybe we should just sell. Take their money and walk away. This isn't worth someone getting hurt. Eli understood her fear. But he thought about Jonas, about a man who'd spent 60 years chasing something he believed in. Thought about Sarah, about doing right even when it cost you something. Thought about the community that was depending on them to stand firm. We don't surrender to bullies, he said quietly. We fight back. Legally, properly, but we fight. And the fight was about to begin. The sheriff's investigation into the fire confirmed arson, but found no direct evidence linking Frontier Extraction. Professional work, the fire marshal said, someone who knew how to cover their tracks. But everyone in Pine Ridge knew who was responsible, even if they couldn't prove it in court. Eli called a meeting at his cabin with the people he trusted most. Tom Henderson, Mary Chen, Doc Pritchard, Frank Sullivan, and Rebecca. They sat around his kitchen table, the same table where this whole journey had begun, and planned their response. We need to document everything, Frank said. Every contact with Frontier, every threat, every suspicious incident. Build a case that shows a pattern of intimidation. And we need to go public, Mary added. Small-town fighting corporate bullies. That's a story that gets attention. My nephew works for the Missoulian. I can reach out to him. Doc Pritchard leaned forward. I've got contacts at the EPA. If Frontier has a history of environmental violations at their other sites, that's ammunition we can use. Shows their real intentions. They divided the work. Mary would coordinate media outreach. Doc would research Frontier's history and regulatory record. Tom would organize community watch at the mine site. Volunteers to ensure no more fires, no more sabotage. Frank would document everything for potential legal action. Eli's role was simpler but harder. He would be the face of their resistance. The steady, honest voice that refused to be intimidated. That evening, alone in his cabin after everyone had left, Eli felt the weight of what they'd taken on. Frontier Extraction was a corporation worth hundreds of millions. They had lawyers, resources, connections. What did Eli have? A 61-year-old body, a 40% stake in an undeveloped mine, and a community of people who were counting on him not to fold. He went to his nightstand and opened the tobacco tin. Sarah's ring lay there, gleaming dully in the lamplight. He'd kept it locked away for 3 years, unable to wear it, but unable to let it go. A symbol of everything he'd lost, everything that had mattered. But maybe it was time for it to mean something else. Time for it to represent not what was gone, but what he was fighting for. Sarah had believed in doing right. She'd lived it, breathed it, made it the foundation of their marriage. If he was going to stand up to Frontier, if he was going to risk everything to protect this community and honor Jonas's legacy, he needed her with him. Eli took the ring from the tin and threaded it onto a leather cord, then tied the cord around his neck. The ring settled against his chest, warm from his skin, a constant reminder of why he did what he did. He wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for principle, for community, for the values Sarah had taught him. The next morning, Mary's nephew arrived from Missoula, a young journalist named David Chen, hungry for a story that mattered. Eli spent 2 hours being interviewed, telling the whole story, from finding Lucky in the barbed wire to Frontier's threats. David's eyes lit up as he took notes. This is good stuff. Small town, corporate intimidation, a donkey that leads to a fortune. Readers eat this up. And if I can verify the fire, tie it to Frontier even circumstantially, he grinned. This could run statewide, maybe even national. I'm not looking for fame, Eli said. I'm looking for justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. Doc Pritchard's research bore fruit quickly. Frontier Extraction had a history. 3 EPA violations at other sites. 2 ongoing lawsuits from communities claiming environmental damage, and a pattern of acquiring small operations through aggressive tactics that bordered on criminal. They're not just bullies, Doc reported. They're careless bullies. They've left contaminated sites, broken promises, destroyed watersheds. If Pine Ridge lets them in, we're looking at the same future. Armed with this information, Eli and Rebecca requested a formal meeting with Frontier's regional director, a man named Marcus Vaughn, who flew in from Denver to discuss terms. They met at the town hall, with half of Pine Ridge in attendance. Vaughn was smooth, practiced, radiating the confidence of someone who always won. I'm here to make you a final offer. $5 million cash for your claim. Full buyout. You walk away wealthy, we develop the site properly, everyone benefits. We've already declined your offers, Rebecca said. That was before the complications, before the regulatory challenges, before you understood how difficult independent mining could be. Vaughn's smile was cold. Things happen in remote sites. Equipment failures, permit delays, safety concerns. It would be unfortunate if your operation faced such obstacles. Eli felt the ring against his chest, felt Sarah's presence in it. He stood, drawing all eyes. Mr. Vaughn, let me be clear. We're not selling, not for $5 million, not for 10. This mine will be operated by this community, for this community. Your threats don't scare us. Your intimidation tactics don't work here. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's our mistake to make. And we'd rather make honest mistakes than dishonest profits. The room erupted in applause. Vaughn's expression hardened. You'll regret this decision. We'll take that chance. After Vaughn left, after the cheering died down, Eli felt both exhilarated and terrified. They'd drawn a line, made their stand. Now they had to hold it no matter what came next. That night, Rebecca found him at Lucky's shed. The donkey dozed in clean straw, peaceful and content. She stood beside Eli in the quiet, both of them looking at the animal that had started all of this. "My daughter arrives next week," Rebecca said softly. "I'm bringing her into a situation that might be dangerous. We can still sell, walk away. Could we?" "Could you?" Eli touched the ring through his shirt. "No, I couldn't. Neither could I. Emma deserves to see her mother fight for something. Deserves to know that doing right matters more than being safe." Rebecca paused. "Besides, I think my grandfather would want us to stand firm. He spent 60 years refusing to compromise. We can do the same for 60 days, or however long this takes." Eli nodded, feeling the truth of it. They were committed now, for better or worse. The fight would come, and they would face it together, him and Rebecca and this whole stubborn community that refused to surrender to bullies. "Whatever happens," he said, "we do it right. We do it honest. We do it the way Sarah would approve of." "Who's Sarah?" "My wife. She died 3 years ago. But she's still teaching me things." Eli touched the ring again. "Still showing me the way forward." Rebecca smiled in the darkness. "Then we'll honor her memory too, along with my grandfather's. We'll show them both that their values still matter." In the shed, Lucky stirred and brayed softly, as if offering his approval. And Eli thought maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. David Chen's article ran on the front page of the Missoulian 3 days later. The headline read, "Small Montana Town Stands Against Corporate Mining Giant." The story detailed everything: Jonas Mackenzie's 60-year quest, Lucky's survival, Eli's choice to search for heirs rather than claim the fortune himself, and Frontier Extraction's pattern of intimidation. By afternoon, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By evening, it was running in newspapers across the region. And with that attention came scrutiny, real scrutiny that corporations like Frontier couldn't easily dismiss. The Montana Attorney General's office opened an investigation into Frontier's business practices. The EPA launched a review of their environmental record. State mining regulators suddenly became very interested in Frontier's operations at other sites across Montana and Wyoming. What emerged was damning. A paper trail of bribery, attempts with local officials at other locations. Evidence of intimidation tactics identical to what they'd used in Pine Ridge. Documented environmental violations that had been swept under the rug through political connections. Frontier Extraction's carefully maintained corporate image crumbled under sustained investigation. The Sheriff's Department, emboldened by state support, reopened their investigation into the mine fire. A witness came forward, a worker Frontier had hired for security consultation, who'd been promised immunity if he cooperated. His testimony confirmed what everyone suspected. Frontier had ordered the arson as a warning, but Frontier wasn't finished. Cornered companies were dangerous companies. Emma arrived on a Saturday, a bright-eyed 8-year-old, with her mother's dark hair and her great-grandfather's curiosity. She fell in love with Lucky immediately, spending hours in the shed talking to the donkey, feeding him apples, brushing his coat. Watching them together, Eli saw echoes of the relationship Jonas must have, had with the animal, that deep connection between human and beast that transcended words. It was Emma's. Second day in Pine Ridge when Frontier made their final move. They came to the mine site in horse, 3 SUVs full of men in dark suits, accompanied by hired security who looked more like muscle than legitimate guards. Marcus Vaughn led them, his expression hard and determined. Tom Henderson was at the site with Frank Sullivan and a crew of local workers. He called Eli immediately. "They're here, trying to shut us down, claiming safety violations." Eli and Rebecca drove to the mine, bringing Emma because there was no time to find someone to watch her. When they arrived, they found Vaughn and his people blocking the mine entrance, physically preventing Tom's crew from working. "This operation is unsafe," Vaughn announced loudly. We're exercising our right as concerned citizens to prevent dangerous activities. You have no authority here, Frank said firmly. This is our legally filed claim, properly permitted, with all safety protocols in place. Then we'll wait for authorities to verify that. In the meantime, no one works. It was a standoff, Frontier's people on one side, the Pine Ridge crew on the other. Eli stepped forward, feeling the weight of Sarah's ring against his chest, feeling the eyes of his community on him. You need to leave. Now. Vaughn smiled coldly. Or what? You going to make us? An old man and a bunch of ranch hands? But Eli wasn't alone. While they'd been talking, more trucks had arrived. People from Pine Ridge, from surrounding ranches, from the wider community that had read David's story and understood what was at stake. Doc Pritchard, Mary Chen, dozens of others forming a wall of bodies between Frontier's people and the mine. They didn't shout, didn't threaten, just stood there quiet and immovable, a living demonstration that some things mattered more than corporate profit. Lucky, grazing near the mine entrance, suddenly brayed loud and charged toward Vaughn's security people. The donkey positioned himself at the mine entrance, ears back, refusing to let strangers approach. It would have been comical if it wasn't so perfectly symbolic. Even the animal understood what they were protecting. Emma laughed delightedly and pulled out her mother's phone, snapping pictures of Lucky's defiance, of the standoff, of this moment when everything hung in balance. The standoff might have turned ugly, might have escalated into violence, but then sheriff's vehicles arrived, 3 of them, lights flashing. And with them came state officials, investigators, people with real authority. The lead investigator approached Vaughn directly. Marcus Vaughn? We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of arson, attempted bribery, and criminal intimidation. Vaughn's face went pale. His security people stepped back quickly, suddenly wanting no part of what was happening. The corporate veneer cracked completely as handcuffs went on and rights were read. As Vaughn was led away, as Frontier's people scrambled to their vehicles and fled, the Pine Ridge community erupted in cheers. Emma ran to Lucky, throwing her arms around the donkey's neck. Rebecca hugged Eli, both of them shaking with relief. We did it, she said. We actually did it. Emma called them all together. Eli, Rebecca, Lucky, Tom, Mary, Doc, Frank, and a dozen others. Group photo! She insisted with the unself-conscious joy of childhood. They gathered near the mine entrance, Lucky in the center, Emma holding his lead rope. The child snapped the photo on her mother's phone, a moment captured forever, showing not victory but something deeper. Family, community, people who'd chosen principle over profit and found they'd gained something more valuable than silver. Looking at them all, Eli finally understood what Sarah had been trying to tell him in that letter. The treasure wasn't silver. It was this: purpose, connection, the knowledge that you'd done right when you could have done wrong. It was standing with people who mattered, fighting for things worth fighting for, finding family in unexpected places. Everything Sarah had wanted for him, he'd found. And it had started with saving a half-frozen donkey on a bitter December morning. 6 months passed, and spring came to Pine Ridge the way it always did, gradually, reluctantly, as if winter needed convincing to loosen its grip. Snow melted from the valleys first, then crept up the mountainsides, revealing brown grass that would green up by June. The creeks ran high with snowmelt, and the air carried that particular smell of earth. Waking up after long sleep, the Mackenzie Boone mine operated on a modest scale, exactly as planned. No industrial extraction, no environmental devastation, just careful, sustainable mining that employed 15 local workers and brought steady income to Pine Ridge without destroying what made the place worth living in. Frank Sullivan managed operations with the kind of attention to detail that would have made Jonas proud. The first silver ingot had been cast in March, a bar of pure metal weighing 5 pounds and stamped with the mine's name and date. Rebecca and Eli had decided together that it wouldn't be sold. Instead, it sat in Mary Chen's store window, displayed on a bed of blue velvet, a symbol of what honest work and honest principles could achieve. Children pressed their faces to the glass to look at it. Tourists took pictures. It represented something more valuable than its metal content. It represented integrity. Tom Henderson's ranch had not only survived, but thrived. The contract work for the mine provided steady income that let him expand his operation, buy better equipment, hire seasonal help. He'd paid back Eli's advance within 4 months, insisted on it despite Eli's protests. Pride mattered to Tom, and Eli understood that. The ranch would pass to Tom's sons now, a legacy secured. Mary Chen's general store had been renovated with mine profits invested as community development. New flooring, fresh paint, updated inventory systems. But it remained fundamentally itself, a place where people gathered, where news was exchanged, where Pine Ridge's heart continued beating. Mary had hired 2 part-time workers, taking some burden off herself while keeping the business family-run. Doc Pritchard's clinic now served 3 counties, with new equipment that let him handle procedures that previously required trips to Missoula. A younger veterinarian had joined the practice, ensuring continuity when Doc eventually retired. Animals across the region received better care because Eli had chosen to do right instead of easy. The Sarah Boone Community Center opened in May, built on land donated by Tom Henderson, funded by mine profits. It housed a library, meeting rooms, a commercial kitchen for community dinners, and a small gymnasium. Rebecca had suggested the name, and Eli had wept when he saw the dedication plaque. Sarah's legacy, built from silver but grounded in the values she'd lived by. Rebecca and Emma had settled permanently in Pine Ridge. Rebecca taught at the regional school, supplementing her income with her share of mine profits, but choosing to keep working because teaching mattered to her. Emma thrived in the small-town environment, making friends, learning to ride horses, spending hours with Lucky in the pasture Eli had fenced for the donkey. The pasture held more than Lucky now. A rescue horse with a damaged leg that would never quite heal right. 3 goats someone had abandoned. A one-eyed barn cat that showed up one day and refused to leave. Eli had become, without quite meaning to, the person people called when an animal needed help. He didn't mind. It gave him purpose beyond the mine, beyond the money. His relationship with Rebecca had settled into something comfortable and familial, not romance, which neither of them wanted but genuine affection and respect. They were partners in business and friends in life, bound together by Jonas's memory and Lucky's survival, and the choice to do right when doing wrong would have been easier. Emma called him Grandpa Eli now, and he'd learned to answer to it without his throat closing up. The child brought light into spaces that had been dark too long, reminded him that life continued, that joy was still possible even after loss. His cabin remained the same, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, windows that rattled. He'd had offers to upgrade, to build something larger, newer, but this cabin held Sarah's presence in every corner, in every creak of the floorboards, in the way light fell through the windows at certain times of day. He wouldn't trade it for any mansion. The town celebration for the community center's opening had been simple but heartfelt. A potluck dinner, speeches that ran too long, children running around while adults talked. Eli had stood at the edge of it all, watching, feeling Sarah's absence and presence simultaneously. She would have loved this, would have been in the middle of it, organizing, laughing, making sure everyone felt included. But she'd also be proud that he'd created it, that he'd taken his grief and his unexpected fortune and turned them into something that served others. That was what she'd asked for in her letter, find purpose again. He had, not just in the mine or the money, but in the community he'd helped preserve and strengthen. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Eli walked back to his cabin with Lucky following behind. The donkey had free run now but chose to stay close, to sleep in the shed Eli had improved for him. Some bonds, once formed, didn't need fences to maintain. They stopped at the north pasture fence, the same fence where Eli had been working that December morning when he'd heard Lucky's desperate braying. The barbed wire had been replaced, properly tensioned. stapled tight to solid posts, mended, made whole again. Eli leaned against a post and watched the sun set over the Cabinet Mountains, painting the peaks orange and purple and gold. Lucky stood beside him, warm and solid and alive. The donkey brayed softly, not distress this time, but contentment. "We did all right, didn't we?" Eli said quietly. "You and me. We found our way through." Lucky pushed his nose into Eli's hand, and Eli stroked the donkey's neck, feeling the steady warmth of living flesh, feeling connected to something larger than himself. He touched Sarah's ring, where it hung against his chest. The metal was warm from his body, from 6 months of wearing it close to his heart instead of hidden in a tin. She was here in this moment, in the community center that bore her name, in the choices he'd made, in the man he'd become after losing her. The real treasure had never been silver. It had been this, a second chance, a renewed purpose, a reason to keep living instead of just surviving. It had been finding family in unexpected places, a granddaughter who wasn't his, a great-granddaughter who called him Grandpa, a donkey who'd led him to redemption. As darkness gathered and stars began appearing overhead, Eli turned toward home. Lucky walked beside him, patient companion, unlikely savior. Behind them, the mended fence stood straight and strong. Ahead, the cabin's windows glowed warm with lamplight. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness changed everything. Sometimes saving a life meant saving your own. And sometimes, when you'd lost everything that mattered, a half-frozen donkey and a choice to do right could lead you back to purpose, back to meaning, back to life. Eli had learned all of this, and he was grateful for every hard lesson, every difficult choice. Every moment that had brought him here, standing in the spring twilight with a donkey beside him and Sarah's ring over his heart. Finally at peace with both his grief and his future, he'd lived, just as she'd asked him to, and it had been worth every step of the journey.